Welcome to the Sample Chapter Podcast, the show where authors read a sample chapter from one of their books. Here's your host, Jason A. Meiske.
Hello, Sample Chapter listeners. Welcome to episode 279 of the show. Hey, I am just getting back from Alaska, still recovering, still extremely busy. But suffice to say, I wanted to go ahead and make sure and get this episode up and ready because our guest today is Stephen Cline. He's a writer, musician, artist, and professor and literary author. And it's a great discussion that he and I have. And I didn't want to wait too long. I wound up needing to take a week there to finish things up on my trip to Alaska. But I didn't want to take longer than that before sharing this episode because y'all are in for a treat. Mr. Cline is easy to talk to, very informative, and so much great advice throughout. We are talking about his creative lifestyle and how that lifestyle is a family affair. It's in the blood, you might say. He has amazing writing advice all throughout the interview, where we're discussing one thing and then he throws in some advice, and it just kind of goes on throughout. We discuss written versus spoken. What is dialogic? That's a term you're going to learn today. The benefits of having a community of creative people to connect to, the ability to take creative and constructive criticism, and so much more before we dive into his latest novel, The Last Book, which is not only an amazing story, but it has stories within a story, and you're going to hear what that means coming up. So stay tuned, everybody. I'm going to get you right over to that episode, and we'll pick things up with Stephen Cline. Hello, Sample Chapter listeners. Welcome back. Hey, this week we are traveling all the way down to Hawaii, which, man, I wish I was there, to join Stephen Cline. Stephen Cline is a retired college professor of literature, creative writing, and composition, as well as a widely published writer of original and well-received fiction and nonfiction. Stephen is also known for his sensitive and intelligent song lyrics, as well as his fine work on guitar and piano. He has performed professionally as a musician on the West Coast, Hawaii, and in the Midwest. He also studied art and worked as a cartoonist, illustrator, had a stained glass company, and worked in the studio of acclaimed artist James Hubble. Ladies and gentlemen, help me welcome to the show, Stephen Cline. Hello, Stephen.
Hey, Jason. Thanks for having me on.
It is my pleasure. I'm just enjoying this photo of you and your dog. You with the guitar and your dog.
Right.
Sitting out. It just looks so comfortable and cozy.
Yeah, that's Sam, who recently passed away, alas. But yeah, great dog he was. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Well, so how's Hawaii right now? I know it's early in the morning there.
It's nice. We live at 1,000 feet up kind of on the slope of one of the volcanoes, not the one that's going off right now. Luckily, that's 100 miles away. But it's cooler. Weather is largely a function of elevation in Hawaii, or at least temperature is. So it might be really hot down at the beach, but as you move up, it gets cooler. So we're at 1,000 feet, which is a real nice elevation. So it's cool. It gets plenty warm, but it is cooler. But because we're on the slope of the mountain, we get, particularly this time of year, we get afternoon clouds and rain, which is really beautiful. And you look out underneath the clouds and you can see the blue sky.
Wow, that's pretty cool, though.
Yeah.
Well, so you've had quite the creative lifestyle so far. Tell us about. I mean, it sounds like you've always been into writing and music and all that. How did you get started?
all that stuff. I don't know. Sometimes I joke, I go, the curse of creativity. It's like you just always kind of have to do it. That James Hubble, the artist that I worked for, he was an architect and a painter, a sculptor, stained glass guy, wrought iron, bronzes, big marble sculptures and stuff like that. And I used to ask him that same question, and he goes, I go, well, why do you do so much art, even on your time off? You're just down here doing art in the big studio. And he goes, well, it's because I don't drink, which was just a, which was just a joke. I mean, he would have a glass of wine, but what he was saying is, it's just kind of built in. It's sort of obsessive. You gotta have your dose of creativity to get the day going, or sort of that kind of thing. So, I've just always kind of had that, and maybe it's genetic. My parents certainly encouraged it. Both my parents had regular jobs, but and my mom's a psychology professor. My dad was a safety inspector, but he was a musician
Mm.
also, and so they encouraged me in music and in art. And my grandmother, my dad's mom, she was a really wonderful artist. So it's in the family. So I reckon it's in the DNA.
Yeah. Which do you have one that comes easier to you? The writing, the music, the art?
Uh, Probably the music. The thing about music is you can just sit down at an instrument and noodle, and just
Mm.
make music, just improvise stuff and kind of get in this sort of, I don't know, lost space.
Yeah.
And I don't know that the other ones, at least for me, are have that quality. But at different times in my life, I've been more into one or the other. But when I was, I don't know, maybe in my 40s, I was trying to keep all three of those balls in the air, and I was just thinking, I think I can do all of these at a B plus level. But because I'm kind of stretching myself thin, I think I should take one of them and put it in kind of a more of a hobby kind of thing that I will come back to periodically, and then focus on the other two and try to develop into a category. And so I took the visual arts, the drawing, the painting, all that kind of stuff, the stained glass work, and I kind of put that onto the side. And I use it when I'm doing album covers or that kind of thing. But that way I could kind of focus on the music and the writing. But the writing, as it takes a while to write a book, and
Yeah.
uh, and so um, it's really nice to be able to have a big project going, and then be able to just slide off and go, I'm going to go write a song. It'll take me, a couple hours or a week or something. But that week, by comparison with the novel, which takes 5 years for me, is kind of a relief, but so it's nice to be able to kind of slide back and forth.
Yeah, yeah. No, and I hear what you're saying too. That's something I was very into art when I was younger, all the way up through high school, and dabbled with writing.
Hmm.
After that, it was just kind of different creative outlets at different times. I painted fishing lures, created my own, did different things like that, different artwork and such, and continued to dabble again. Was in well, managed a theater for a while, and I
Ah,
just loved the marketing side of that, and
oh,
essentially would create set pieces, turn my lobby into, okay, it's now this movie set that we're
nice.
promoting. And so whether it was a cartoon like B movie or Jurassic World or something like that, and that was a lot of fun to do. But then of course after that was done and I moved on, it was just like, man, what am I going to do? And my wife was the one who kind of pushed me. She's like, you've always wanted to write, you need to get into that. And I've been doing that
Right.
for, oh gosh, 8 7 8 years now, and really enjoying it. And I think that's where the podcast comes in, is that gives me that side attraction to kind of, one helps refresh the other,
Yeah.
speaking to
Yeah.
other authors, and kind of fills my cup again,
Yeah.
one way or the other.
It's great to be sort of in a community of creative people. And so I'd feel that for sure. I mean, just this conversation is that for me.
Hmm.
But also when I get together with, I've got a lot of great musician friends, and just recently we went over to one set of friends, and there was we had a small party, and there, I don't know, maybe eight of us there, and everybody kind of took turns playing original music. And
Mm.
on certain ones you might chime in, but other ones you would just listen and close your eyes and enjoy their creative expression. My wife is a fabulous poet, and so she had us all in tears, numerous times. So it's just neat to be in that creative stew, and sharing
Oh
it.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, my the writing group I'm a part of is we are an eclectic group. I mean, we've got poets, fiction writers, nonfiction writers, another guy who writes essentially chicken soup for the soul type stories,
Oh, right.
little
Yeah.
little real life snippets of things that have
Uh-huh.
happened to him in his life, and it's such an eclectic thing. And then a couple of them are songwriters, and they do local song events as well. And it's what's really neat is getting together with them and hearing from such a wide variety because it all what do they say, it's all grist for the mill. It's all fascinating to hear somebody else's take on something
Yeah.
you wrote or something that somebody else wrote, and maybe you got an opinion on it, but then you hear another opinion like, oh, I didn't think of it that way. And
There was
that's
a
always fascinating.
There was a writer of literary criticism, a Russian guy back in the early part of the 1900s, I think, Bakhtin, and he talked about the arts as being dialogic. In other words, they were, in a sense, a dialogue from one artist to another, or one generation of artists to another. People would grow up reading a certain kind of literature, and then they would come off of that or write a different way, sort of
Mm.
answer that or that kind of thing. In Herman Hesse's book, The Glass Bead Game, they're playing this game, the Glass Bead Game, and a move. Somebody might make a move, and the move was some artistic piece, and then the other guy, next guy, would answer it with something that fit, but it was in philosophy. And the next person would answer that in some other, sort of creative field. And so there's this back and forth dialogue between the disciplines. Fascinating.
Oh wow, that is neat. Yeah, I attended a writing conference one time where the person teaching one of the classes I went to, they we as a group, he gave us information. He said, "All right, give me a person, a place, a thing, an activity, put it all up there." I said, "All right, y'all have 10 minutes to write a scene based on that
Mhm.
information." And it was amazing for us to find out that hey, we're all writing about the same thing, and yet every one of them were different,
Isn't that neat?
just based on how what we think and how we do it. He goes, yeah. He goes, so I mean, it's hard to copy somebody else if you're just writing for yourself, even though you have the same information, the same basis for
Hmm.
everyone. Now if you throw in a name like Luke Skywalker or something else, well, your mind goes a different direction, perhaps. But
Right, right.
yeah, that was
That
an
that'll kind of
interesting
steer it.
exercise.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that stuff. And the having other people you can bounce stuff off of. I'm not in a writing group, but I do have a poet wife. And so there are a lot of times where, I'll bounce stuff off. I mean, every time I bounce stuff off her. And there's one time I was writing a short fiction piece for this beautiful magazine called The Surfer's Journal. It's kind of the National Geographic of surfing magazines. And I was writing this fiction piece about some American missionaries who came to the islands in like the 1830s. And I was taking on the voice of this young woman and giving her impressions of the native cultures and her own family and the sort of different worldviews of the two people, I mean, the two groups. And she's writing a letter back to her friend in the States. And so I'm writing this thing and just trying to channel this girl, and and I would write, 4 or 5 paragraphs and give it to Nancy, and she'd read it, and she goes, she goes, oh, right here, you became a man. She goes, a woman wouldn't say it like that. That kind of an insight is just not, you would have to, and it's like, oh, okay, I get it. I totally see that. You're right. I started mansplaining or something like that, you know. So it does
Oh
have to have
yes.
somebody do that.
Yeah, I love my wife's advice. I know I can come to her for anything, and sometimes it's just explaining it to her. It comes to me, the answer
Hmm.
that I'm needing, but she always has a very practical or very straightforward way
Hmm.
of answering me and giving me something like, and she'll just throw an answer out there, and I'm looking at her going, "Yeah, you're right. Yeah, that's it right there." And she's like,
Yeah,
"Okay,"
yeah.
shrugs and walks on. And like it was just
We,
like, yeah, why is this so hard? Why is it taking me so long
right,
to write this book? I don't get
right.
it.
We've also developed over the years. I don't know. A lot of we artists are, maybe more thin-skinned than we ought to be, but maybe that makes us better artists. But so criticism isn't always that easy to take, and we've developed over the years, a level of trust where somebody can make constructive criticism and you don't take it personally. You
Mhm.
just, we're all, trying to improve the art and touch it, sort of deeper, more transparent or realistic, emotions and that kind of thing. And so it's neat. And so, she shares her poetry with me when it's in its early stages, and I can make those same kinds of contributions. So it's a neat dynamic that we have in that way.
It is, yeah, and I think there's certainly something to creative um, criticism versus just somebody being mean. And I've
Right.
gotten decent about if I picking up one from the other. And I guess even if I hear somebody saying something mean about like my writing or whatever it is, like I'll kind of listen to it kind of half cocked, like, I mean, is there something to this though? I mean, where are they coming from? And no, they're just
Yeah.
trying to be mean, or is it maybe something I can change? But generally, with any kind of criticism, I'll run it through and kind of get what I can from it, and then I shake it off. But sometimes it's like,
Yeah.
oh, that hurts.
Yeah. Yeah. That I've been in a couple writing groups, and I didn't really like them. It just seemed like some people just like they had to have an opinion about everything, and it's
Mm,
like and like they were an authority about everything, and it's like I didn't really like that. But you're
yeah.
right in terms of having some feedback. And even if they're telling you something you already know, when I worked for James Hubble, was he wanted me to be the foreman of the studio, and there were about 6 or 8 people, craftsmen, who worked in the studio. Some guys doing wrought iron, and other guys doing wood carving, and people up in the glass studio, where I mostly worked in the glass studio. So we're all these different craftspeople working on the shop on various projects for homes or maybe a chapel or all this stuff. So he knew that I'd worked in a big factory once. This is what you can do with with a BA in English. You end up working in a woodworking factory. So I'd been a supervisor in one of those, and he goes, "Oh, you know how to?" Or I was asking him how he bid his jobs, and he goes, "Oh, we've done this job before, and our job like this." And I go, "Oh, so you know what the time and materials were?" He goes, "What?" I go, you didn't keep track of time and materials? How do you bid this job? He goes, you know how to do that? And I go, yeah, sure, it's easy. And he goes, so he made me his kind of foreman of the studio, kind of a informal foreman. So we would get, he had me spend 2 weeks with each craftsman. And I already knew the stained glass, that there's another guy up there who was good in the studio, stained glass studio. And so he had me spend 2 weeks with each person. I learned a ton, from, about wrought iron and that kind of stuff. And James and I, Hubble, would walk around like once a week, just walk around the properties out in the country and just chat about what's going on, what his plans are, what the jobs are, and stuff. And and he was asking me how it was going, and I was up in the glass studio, and I was going, well, I know 90% of, what Charles is showing me, and James goes, don't be too proud to listen to the 90% you know in order to get the 10% that you don't know. And that has really that has really stuck with me. And I think that's, akin to what you were just talking about, what you do with the feedback and, what you can gain from it and what you can disregard.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Exactly. That's exactly right. So, your latest book, the last book,
Hmm.
uh, I'm. It's a fascinating title, and reading the story behind it and what it's about is fascinating. Give us a little bit, what's going on with this book.
Okay. Well, the last book is it's about, believe it or not, a book. And this guy, he's the lead character, Charles. He's a professor of English, and he goes to a music repair shop, an old-fashioned atelier, and to have his guitar fixed. And he's talking to this old gentleman, and they have this wide-ranging conversation. And at the end of which, the old guy gives him this book. It's an old, worn book. It looks like the the cover that I have for my book, which I could talk about. But the so Charles takes the book home and he opens it and he reads a story, and it's very engaging. And it just like it was written just for him and his particular interest in sort of medieval stories and stuff. So he reads it, and then he closes the book and he sees the cover change, and he opens the book and it's a new story. And what he finds is every time you open that book, it's a different story. And that is just, super intriguing to him. How is that happening? What's the mystery behind this book? And but he finds that each story is super well suited to his tastes. And I mean, he has eclectic tastes, but all of them seem to be sort of spoken to by these stories. And so he just reads obsessively. And then he starts kind of getting worried about it. He starts feeling like he's become addicted to this book. And so he goes and talks to the old guy again, and he tells kind of a story of where they got it, his family, and that's super mysterious. And then he goes home and has the book stolen, and that's already too much of me telling you what goes on. But what he learns at that point is that there are people that want that book, and for different reasons. And they end up being kind of in two camps. One camp of which Charles ends up being is the camp that goes, creativity, art, stories, imagination is a mysterious thing. Where do things come from? Where do stories come from? The ancients talked about muses of the arts, and and the word inspiration is to breathe in. And in the old stories, the god, breathes on you, breathes on your face, and that's you inspire that you breathe in their idea that they've given to you, and that was their way of trying to symbolize the ineffable qualities of creativity. So there's one side that they're just like, this is an amazing book, and it sort of embodies this whole sort of mystery of creation, and I'm okay with that.
Hmm.
I don't have to solve that. And there are these other guys who are technologists. They're like digital nerds. They're full on into having the society uh, continue and maximize, the whole computer organization, AI taking over everything. And they realized that they could use that book because they're really good at the technology, but they're not so good at imagining a world where that stuff has come to fruition. Um, which is what sci-fi writers, do. They're always imagining what the future is, and so
Mm-hmm.
they need help with that, and they realize that they could use the book to help them because the book seems to tell stories for whoever's reading it. They can
Oh,
use it
yeah.
to help them imagine this techno future that they believe in. And so it ends up being an adventure, and conflict and people chasing each other, and it gets pretty intense. All the while, Charles is still kind of an academic guy, and sort of talking about society and about the state of education and how nobody reads anymore, like you were just saying when we were talking earlier about audiobooks. People say, I don't really read books anymore, and I just listen to the book on tape or whatever. So that's the kind of the fundamental, conflict in the book. But in the meantime, other characters come in. There's some romance stuff that happens. But one thing about the book, about my book, is in telling about these different stories, different people are opening the book and reading the story. Well, the story that they're reading is in the book. And so that gives me a chance to write in completely different genres, like short stories.
Oh yeah.
And which was great fun because I'm telling the main story in the first person, and the first person is a wonderful point of view because it can be very internal. You can really get inside the person, but it doesn't have the benefit of third person, which where in third person you can go, well, Billy Bob was thinking this. Meanwhile, Sarah was thinking this. If the third person omniscient can allow you to be, godly everywhere, and
Yeah.
you can't do that with first person the way and so you have to learn about the other characters through their actions and through dialogue. But with the last book, I could write these other stories. And in those other stories, it's all third person. And so it's kind of a relief to be able to switch points of view and then tell these stories. And there's a wide range of stories. There's a couple that are about oligarchs in different cultures in the past. There's one that's about a pandemic that renders the entire population of the earth deaf. What happens to society when everybody's deaf? How they adapt and that kind of thing. And there's that original medieval tale that he read, and there was one. It was really interesting. Remember, a few weeks ago when in Europe, they lost their power. It's like whole countries went dark. There's a story. There's a story that one of the guys reads in the last book. No, it's actually it happens anyway. Where the power does go down in our whole country, and what happens? It's like we have all this stuff, and you and I are right now dependent on electricity. What happens when electricity, dies? Well,
Right.
I'll write you a letter, or what, so one of the part of the book has that happen, and so there are, these other sort of themes that get woven in.
That's
Uh,
great.
yeah, I think that's mostly it.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah, what I kept thinking listening to this and how I mean it's an incredible story, and I just kept thinking like well, I guess it's mostly references movies. Like I keep hearing, oh, there's no original stories anymore. Everything's
Mhm.
repeats or rehashes of old and whatever. But then I hear about a story like yours, and it's just like there are so many wonderful original stories out there that are just waiting to be told for people to discover it, and maybe one day they'll be on the screen too. And it's just this is really cool.
Preach it, brother, preach it.
I know you're listening, Hollywood.
Yeah, right. I have had people tell me, "Oh, this would make a great movie," and they also say that about my last book, which is called Echoes Over Water, and it would be, a good movie as well. And when I write, I do uh, think almost in cinematic terms. That is not so much that I'm thinking of like a scene in a movie, but I am. I do try to just watch it. I'm not just hammering it out of my left brain, the logical part. I'm trying to get in a space where I can sort of see what's going on and watch it unfold like a movie. So
Hmm.
it's a good way to describe things. When when I was writing the other book, Out Goes Over Water, once again I was talking to James Hubble, and part of the story that story takes place in Ireland, and he goes, "Well, you're going, right?" And I go, "To Ireland?" And he goes, "Yeah, you're writing about Ireland. You got to go." And I go, "Well, I'd love to, but I can't afford it." And he goes, "No, you have to go." And I go, "Well, why?" He goes, "Because the air's different." And what he was saying there, I later did have the opportunity to go to Ireland, and part of the book takes place in Newfoundland, and I was able to go there as well. And is you go to these places, and when you're writing about them, it just takes a few details that are sort of dead on,
Hmm.
that you can observe that makes it seem real to people. Verisimilitude is the word, like truth. And so when I went to Ireland, the air was different. I, you know, and I was so glad that he pointed that out because I'm like, oh man, there's something about the way my hands are moving through the air. It's different than where I live, which was down by the ocean. It's a thicker, moister air kind of. Um, and when I went to Newfoundland, I had researched. I'd already written most of that section, but then I got to go, and I had written about these forests and stuff, and but what I didn't know is because the soil is so thin over there that the forests they aren't that tall. There were places
Oh.
where it was like it was like a sea of Christmas tree farms. They weren't that small, but they were noticeably smaller than from where I was from, and that in walking through the forest it smelled like strawberries. There weren't any strawberries, but it smelled like strawberries. And those kind of details wouldn't show up in research. They would only
Right.
show up. They only show up by going and immersing myself in the place. And then, another thing we talk about when writing is spirit of place, that that the place influences the story. Certain kinds of stories can only happen in the snow. Certain kind of
Yeah.
stories can only happen in the desert. The place influences the story. And so if you can get the place right, and I think a lot of writers overdo it. They kind of go, okay, I got to open my paragraph and I got to describe the place, and they go on and on and on about the pack rats that are blah blah blah. You only need two or three very true descriptions, and people will feel that as being true. And so then you can move on. And the same is true with people with character development. I get irritated with writers who, like, in the second paragraph of a section, when a new character comes on, they have, I don't know, three sentences. They say the droop in his eye and the slight flare in his nose, and then they sort of over describe this thing. And the same is true is, like, just get a couple of very real details. Show how the emotion is showing up in their eye,
Hmm.
and what that means, what the unspoken things, the subtleties. You get a few of those right, and that's plenty. And you don't have to do it with every character the same way. So
Yeah.
that verisimilitude is just a hugely important thing. And so for me, it does take me a long time to write and develop characters because I'm kind of waiting for them to reveal themselves to me, in a truthful way, and how does this person speak? It's really tricky to get
Right.
dialogue correct. Everybody speaks differently. We certainly speak a lot differently than we write. We don't speak generally in complete sentences, and depending on uh, where we're using language, who we're talking to, our language changes. It's called the discourse group. So like you and I have the certain discourse group right now. We're casual, but we're slightly elevated because we're talking about, writing process and stuff like this. That's a different kind of language that I would use when I go down to the beach and chat with my surfer friends. So,
Yeah.
you got to keep that in mind. And so that was a really important thing in the book. So Charles is this academic guy. He does, use a lot of highfalutin language. But there are other times where the other main character, Celeste, the female lead, she's an academic as well too, and they can do that. But there are other times where they're just bantering or they're teasing each other back and forth, this sort of rapid fire banter, and that's tricky to get right too. But again, I just try to watch it in my head. How would this person say this? You guys, I'll just sort of look in the window and you guys talk,
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
you try to transcribe it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's been one of the benefits of doing this show is getting to hear the voices from other people and even reading some of my own stuff out loud once in a while. I was
Hmm.
like, when it comes to my dialogue, I better read this out loud, see if it
Hmm.
sounds natural. And I've
Bingo.
tripped myself up a lot, realizing, oh my gosh, what was I trying to say or have my character say here when this just does not. It's like you can write this, but you can't say it. It's just not coming out right.
Exactly, exactly. It's a minefield, but when you get it right, it's awesome.
Hmm.
But and when I'm doing that kind of thing, as I said, I'm trying to watch it. I'm trying to let them, and I'm trying to transcribe it. I feel like I'm a medium, trying to let them talk through me. But it's exhausting. I can do that for 1 or 2 hours, and then I gotta go do something else.
Yep, I hear you. I hear you. Well, we are wrapping up here. I got
Okay.
one other question for you here before we go. A little bit different than what I've been doing lately, but it's what with all your creative endeavors that you've got for those out there who are also creative, what advice do you have them when they're in a creative slump?
Uh, you know, uh, you do what I call is like, I used to wait for the muse, wait to be inspired, and I realized the muse, was not that talkative sometimes, and sometimes they just leave me alone for a year at a time. So I used to talk about sort of enticing the muse, and so I try to tell people to find a place where their mind is free, where they're unencumbered. I remember when my kids were going to high school, you'd hear this like loud music coming from their bedroom, and they're supposed to be doing homework. Open the door, and Metallica is just booming in there, and you're like ready to go. Hey, do your homework, and they look up and they go, "What?" And they go, "Don't bother us. We're doing our homework." And they were using the loud music to create kind of a bubble where the rest of the world was excluded and they could concentrate on their homework. And so when it reminded me when I was in grad school, I was working on my thesis and it was a hard academic thing and I was stuck. I had writer's block and I just went, well, never mind. I'm just going to go take a hot shower. And in the shower, it's just steam, so in essence your main window into the world, literally your eyes, is cut off. It's just fog, and then the sound is roaring, so you can't really hear anything, and you stop hearing the roaring shower too, so your ears are also cut off. And then I, for one, keep my tension in my neck, and so if just standing there with this hot water on my neck in this steamy noisy place, I just was completely relaxed. And I wasn't thinking at all. That sort of left logical side of my brain was not moving. And then an idea would pop up, just sort of just bubble up out of nowhere. Oh, that's a good idea. Thanks. I'll use that. And I'm going back to my relaxation. Boom. And it just kept happening. And finally, I kind of try to memorize those and put them into a paragraph and then get back to my relaxation. And the ideas kept coming to the point where I went, I need to get out and write this stuff down. So, so I ran out dripping wet, writing on the bed. Uh,
Yep.
but so people need to get in a place or think about where they can be relaxed like that and let their brains go. I talked to one student one time, and she said that she would go down to this one wall off the beach that had been collecting sun's heat all day, and she would lean against this wall and watch the sun go down, and this warmth would just permeate, and then her mind would relax. And other people, they say, oh, just driving with the music on. I'm cut off from the world. I'm not talking on my phone. I'm letting my mind just be free. And so, you can't like work through writer's block. You gotta glide past it or get into some sort of glide mode. That's what I think works best certainly for me.
Yeah, yeah, I hear you. That's actually worked for me sometimes too, whether it's jumping out and mowing the yard or
Yeah,
going for a ride, just something that's no longer an automatic thing, like you said, a shower or mowing
yeah,
the yard. Just something where it's like, yeah, I'm not considering that. I'm not concentrating on that anymore. I'm concentrating on something else, and my mind is just focused on that. And it's yeah, I'll get answers will come to me sometimes. Go, oh,
yeah,
that's how they
exactly.
get from A to
Yeah.
B. Yeah,
For those of us who grew up with uh, manual transmission, it's like putting in the clutch.
yeah,
Put in the clutch
yeah.
and just coast while disengage.
There you go. That's it. Oh my gosh. Stephen, where can people find and follow you?
Well, I have a website. It's stephencline.com. So stephencline.com. And there's stuff about my books, my art, my music, my photography, but also the at least two of the books. This one, the last book, and Echoes Over Water, are both available on Amazon.
Fantastic. All right. Well, we're going to have links for those, all of that in the show notes, everyone. So that way you can just click down below and hop right on over. Stephen,
Great.
thank you so much for joining me. This has
Oh, I
been
really
wonderful.
Thanks. I really appreciate the invite, and I've enjoyed talking to you a lot, Jason. Good luck with your writing as well.
Thank you so much. And everybody listening, don't forget to tune back in next week when you get to hear Mr. Cline reading a sample from the last book. Until then, take care, everybody.